Pastor Doug here from Crossroads. It's great to be with you. I hope that today's message will draw you closer to Jesus.
In 1912, Robert Falcon Scott led a 5-man expedition on a race against a rival Scandinavian team to try and reach the South Pole. And in the preparations for this particular expedition, Scott made a series of almost inconceivable bad decisions. First off, he recruited an entire team of people, none of which had any cold weather expedition experience. Nor did anyone from his team bother to acquire any cold weather experience prior to the trip. Scott also failed to properly research the conditions they would face in Antarctica when it came to gear and all those type of things. When it came time to decide what sort of transportation they were going to use once they got onto Antarctica. Instead of going with the traditional time-tested method of dog sleds, Scott, for some reason, chose to go with ponies and untested brand new motorized vehicles. And despite all this incredible lack of preparation, this team believed they were going to succeed. They believed they were going to do it, and everything was going to be fine. Well, they arrived in Antarctica, and immediately things started going wrong. The cold weather suits that they brought with them were not even close to sufficient for the harsh conditions. As they were traversing the harsh terrain, the ponies didn't work because the snow was too deep for them. The motorized vehicles that had never been tested in those sorts of conditions broke down constantly in the harsh weather and were needing to be prepared. So despite all of this, Scott continued to make terrible, irrational decisions, continuing to believe that the team would succeed, including the decision to push on towards the South Pole, despite the fact that they were running out of time and had very few resources remaining. And they made it to the South Pole. They finally arrived at the South Pole, only to see a note from the Scandinavian team who'd been there a month earlier. The much better prepared, much wiser team. Unfortunately, no one from Scott's expedition made it home alive. For some reason, Scott and the rest of his team believed that despite what they did and what they didn't do in preparation, in thinking, in decision-making, that despite all of that, it would not affect their outcome, and that they could continue proceeding on as if their future was still bright. Now, there's a term for this type of thinking, for this type of behavior. Foolishness. Foolishness. Now, at some point in our life, every single one of us has done something foolish. We've made foolish decisions, we've behaved foolishly, and at some point we've had to bear the consequences of our own foolish actions and our own foolish decision making. Maybe it was in the form of a bad relationship. Maybe it was some ill-advised purchase that you made, or a hasty career switch, or we trusted the wrong person. At some point, we've all done something foolish. And as we think back on some of the foolish things that we've done, maybe a fair bit of it happened to you when you were younger. And so sometimes we have a tendency to think that maybe foolishness is simply a trait of the young. But let me tell you, getting older is no insulation for foolishness. As Q says to James Bond in the film Skyfall, age is no guarantee of wisdom. Or as Walt Whitman perhaps more eloquently put it, I am of old and young, of the foolish as much as the wise. Wherever you're at, whatever stage of life you are currently in. Foolishness, foolish decisions can be right around the corner for each and every one of us. And if we're lucky, maybe those foolish decisions only affect something small. Maybe we just lose a little bit of time, energy, money. But if we aren't, and if the foolishness that we're doing involves something to do with our lives, it could maybe severely knock us off course, possibly even end in tragedy. So this summer, we've been in this series called Be Wise, a study of Proverbs. And Proverbs is so full of practical wisdom, principles that are designed for us to try and keep us from falling into pits, to keep us from falling into traps like foolishness. And if we pay attention, and if we follow the wisdom of Proverbs properly, it can actually provide us with a way to foolproof our lives. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, many of you know that I have a toddler. And one of the constant dangers of toddlers is spills. Toddlers are always in danger of spilling something, their milk, their water, their juice, their snacks, any of those type of things. And because everyone knows that spills are a constant danger with toddlers, they've designed special devices for them. There are spill-proof cups, which work most of the time. There are relatively spill-proof snack containers so that they can get the snacks in and out and they're not going to dump everywhere most of the time. Firefighters, constant danger of fire. And because they know they're in constant danger of fire, they implement safety protocols. They have fire retardant suits and gloves. They wear breathing tanks. If you're a hiker or a camper, one of the dangers you constantly face is water. So they make waterproofing for tents. You can get waterproof matches. Your hiking shoes can be waterproof. Whenever something is a known constant danger, there are steps you can take to proof yourself against the consequences of experiencing that. And we can do the exact same thing when it comes to foolishness and foolish behavior. We can do certain things that will help us proof our life against it. So how are we going to do that? We're going to do that in 3 steps this morning. We are going to recognize and remove foolish behavior. We are going to recognize and avoid foolish people. And we're going to recognize and hang around wise people. Now, first things first. Before we can remove and before we can avoid, the first thing we have to do is we have to recognize. We have to start out by being able to recognize foolishness in ourselves and in the people around us. So to help us out this morning, to help us learn how to recognize foolishness, we're going to go to trusted and known scholar Jeff Foxworthy. Now, Jeff Foxworthy made a name for himself in the 1990s, largely through his very popular redneck jokes. You know the ones I'm talking about. You might be a redneck if you've ever made change in the offering plate. You might be a redneck if the Blue Book value of your truck increases or decreases depending on how much gas is in the tank. You might be a redneck if you've ever cut your grass and found a car. You might be a redneck if you think the stock market has a fence around it. You might be a redneck if someone asks to see your ID and you show them your belt buckle. See, Jeff Foxworthy somehow managed to train us in how to recognize a redneck. And he did it in a very specific way. He defined the behavior and then he showed us the pattern. So how are we going to learn to recognize fools? We're going to do it the exact same way. We are going to define the behavior and we're going to show you the pattern here this morning. So let's take a look at Proverbs, because this is where Proverbs comes in incredibly handy. As Jeff Foxworthy is to rednecks, so Proverbs is to fools. So let's take a look at it. Number 1, you might be a fool if you consult with God instead of fearing God. Proverbs 1:7 says this: "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. So what does it mean to consult with God? What does that mean? Instead of fearing him, what does it mean to consult with God? Well, my wife and I like to take walks around the city with our daughter. And so as we're leaving the house, usually one of us will call out to the other one, do you have keys? Do you have keys to the house to make sure we don't lock ourselves out? Well, we've gotten significantly lazier in the process of doing this. And a couple weeks ago, I'm already outside with Olivia. I'm getting the stroller ready and stuff. And she comes out and she goes, do you have keys? And I said, no. Do you have keys? I turned around and the door is shut. She's already out. Which led to a, unfortunately, very long and very difficult attempt for us to break into our own house, where our 2-year-old sits around and goes, what are you guys doing? What's the problem here? We consulted with each other after the fact. It doesn't matter if you ask if one of us have keys after the door is already shut, after we've already made the decision. And one of the ways we consult with God instead of fearing him is when we do something or don't do something, and then we ask God to show up, to fix it, to bless it. Maybe you didn't prepare for that meeting, or you're supposed to do that lesson and you didn't do it, or you had that test you were going to have and didn't prepare for it. And then in the moment shows up and you're like, God, help me out. Or maybe you had a big decision to make. You were going to move, or you were going to take that new job, or you're going to make that really large purchase. And you went ahead and did it, and then asked God to show up and bless it. That's what it means to trust in our own understanding. That's one of the ways we do this. We do what we want, and then we consult God about it later. And that doesn't have a lot of respect or fear for the wisdom of God and for what he might want to say in our lives. Number 2, you might be a fool if you believe you're never wrong and are not teachable. Proverbs 12:15. The way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. Proverbs 18:2. Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions. I'll take social media for 1,000, Alex. See, this foolish trait has 2 specific pieces. One of it is the stubborn insistence that you are always right. And the other one is not being willing to listen or to be teachable by anyone else. And often those 2 traits tend to go hand in hand. Your parents warned you about that relationship, but you didn't want to listen. I know exactly where I'm going. You don't really know where you're going. Or you believe that you don't need help, that you don't need training, that you know everything perfectly fine the way it is. I had an example of this a couple months ago, and it made me cringe a little bit. I have a podcast that I've been doing for like 4 years or so, and I'm the one who edits the podcast and puts it online. And I learned just enough in the program to be able to edit the podcast and put it online. I'm like, all right, that's good. I don't need to learn anything else about this program. I just need enough to get it up and going. Well, a couple months ago, so this is like at least 3.5 years into doing this on a weekly basis, I realized that I had accidentally been doing double the work. Every single week, I was taking double the amount of time it should have taken. Had I just done one little thing, I would have cut my time in half. I spent 3.5 years doing this the wrong way because I had decided I didn't need to learn anything more. That was not a fun revelation. Fools don't admit that they're wrong or allow others to teach them. Number 3. You might be a fool if you flirt with danger and are proud of it. Proverbs 27:12. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Proverbs 22:5. In the paths of the wicked are snares and pitfalls, but those who would preserve their life stay far from them. Fools ignore warnings. Fools scoff at danger. Fools believe that they will be the exception, and fools are proud of it. And this is one of the broader characteristics of fools, is they don't believe in the connection between what they do today and the outcomes they're going to have in the future. We see this regularly in something like gang culture, being very proud of their constant flirtation with danger. But average, everyday people do the same thing on a regular basis. We do it with our health. The doctor comes to you and says you have very high cholesterol, but we don't change our diet. Or we know we need to move more, but we joke about never exercising. We do it in our finances. We're constantly spending and spending and spending and not leaving ourselves with adequate savings or future planning. We ignore safety protocols. Especially if you've ever worked a manual labor job, you've always encountered that one person who doesn't believe any of the safety stuff applies to them. I used to have a coworker that if he had to do just a quick spot weld, would not use a mask. For some reason he believed that wouldn't affect him. I don't know. We do the same thing with substances. Yeah, I can drink too much. It's not going to affect me. I can try that just the one time. Think about it. How many times have we gotten ourselves in trouble? We've ensnared ourselves. We've fallen into that pit, and there really wasn't any warning? How many times has that really happened? Number 4, you might be a fool if you give full vent to your anger. If you give full vent to your anger. Proverbs 29:11. Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end. And Proverbs 14:16. The wise fear the Lord and shun evil, but a fool is hot-headed and yet feels secure. So this term full vent, what does this mean? Well, maybe you do this in your car, especially when it's hot out in the summer. I get in my car, I turn it on, and the air conditioner starts spitting hot air at me. So I immediately turn that thing down to 1. But the moment the air starts getting cold, I yank the thing the whole way up and start blasting it in my face. That's what full vent means. It means your anger and your frustration yanked up full blast, blasting out at anyone and anything that happens to be in your path. Fools vent their anger when they verbally berate people, when they make physical displays of anger like punching things or throwing things or kicking things. They scream and yell. They post angry, hurtful, hateful things online or in emails. And rarely does it have positive results. It always seems to end badly. Just a couple weeks ago, I saw a story of Mason Miller, the Oakland A's phenom young pitcher. He's a fantastic pitcher. Throws an electric fastball. He's virtually unhittable. He's one of the best pitchers in the game right now. A couple weeks ago, he punched a training table and broke his arm in frustration. Punched a training table. Now he's out for weeks on end. And you'd be surprised at how often this happens in baseball in particular, but in sports in general. They vent their frustration and it has negative consequences. And if we just do it in the moment, if we just do it once in a momentary thing, it's going to hurt us. But if it becomes a pattern in life, it has much broader long-term consequences. Staying with the sports world, I don't know how many are familiar with the legendary coach Bobby Knight, Indiana, Texas Tech, amongst others. He was one of the best coaches in the game for a while, won several national titles, had many players go to the NBA. But being a great coach is probably not what he is most known for. It's his anger. It's throwing chairs across the arena. It's berating his own players, getting kicked out of games, choking a student in the hallway, getting fired because he never learned how to control his anger. And that's his reputation, not the other stuff. Fools let their emotions control and dominate them. And number 5, you might be a fool if you never take responsibility. If you never take responsibility. Proverbs 14:9, fools mock at making amends for sin, but goodwill is found among the upright. A fool doesn't believe they ever need to take responsibility for their mistakes, for their failures, for their errors. In fact, they mock even the possibility of doing so. Andy Stanley has a good quote about irresponsibility, and it's this: irresponsibility always becomes someone else's responsibility. And when he was trying to teach this to his kids, one of the things he would do is they would say, leave their towels on the bathroom floor. Instead of just going and telling them to pick up the towels, he would go tell them, go ask your mother to pick up your towels for you. And they were like, no, we'll just go do it. He said, no. Go ask your mother to pick up your towels for you, because when you leave them there, that's what you are doing. An irresponsible person is the person who never believes they do anything wrong. They always play the victim. It's never their fault. It's the boss's fault. It's their coworker's fault. It's their family member's fault. It's society's fault. Anything and anyone else is at fault except for them. We've all seen these people. We've all been around these people. How many of you like hanging out with a person who doesn't take responsibility? How many of you like them being one of your coworkers? Not taking responsibility is exceptionally foolish because it precludes learning. When we don't take responsibility, we're not going to be able to learn from our mistakes. We're not going to be able to learn from our errors and make corrections to what we were doing. And we're going to repeat the same mistakes over and over and over again. Proverbs 26:11 illustrates this perfectly. As a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly. So this is one of these awesome visual metaphors from Proverbs. If you've ever had a dog, you've seen this. It is quite disgusting. But it's supposed to be disgusting. That's the whole point. It's a disgusting metaphor because we are supposed to be disgusted by repeated foolish behavior. You know those people, they just make the same mistakes over and over again, the same bad decision over and over again. Whether it's with money, whether it's with romantic relationships, whether it's that endless series of jobs where they never seem to get it. Okay. Foolishness. So now we've learned how to recognize foolishness. Let's start with the foolproofing. Let's foolproof our lives against foolishness. Now, my first job when I got my job was at Green Glen Produce. It was a green bean factory. The green beans would come in, they would go through these belts and get snipped and cleaned and bagged and all that stuff. So one of my jobs was I was to clean the belts once the green bean run is finished. And this cleaning the belts was a 3-step process. The first was soap. We had to soap down all the belts. That was to remove the large chunks. The big majority of the dirt that happened to be on the belts was done through the spraying soap process. The second time through, I would rinse it. That was to get any of the fine particles, anything that was left over that the soap didn't happen to get. And the third one was a little more proactive. It was a sanitizer. I would run through and I would sanitize each one of the belts to prevent germs and prevent the environment from getting contaminated before the next run of green beans came in. Similarly, foolproofing our lives is going to be a 3-step process. And it's going to help us avoid foolishness. It's going to help us prevent foolishness if we pay attention to it and if we take it seriously. So back to our 3 steps that we talked about at the beginning. We're ready now for the first one, to recognize and remove foolish behavior. Now, as we look at the list, and we'll put that list up of foolish behavior that we talked about, where have you been guilty? What on this list has been something you've struggled with? Maybe as we were talking about them, something in your life popped up in your mind. For me, as I was going through this, one of the ones I know I have a danger with is number one, that idea of consulting with God. I can sometimes have a tendency to lean into my own understanding and my own knowledge. And if I'm not careful, I can run ahead of God without asking God if this is where He wants me to be or what He wants me to do. And so for me, I know that I have to discipline myself to fear God. I need to be in constant, regular communication with him. What about you? Are there specific areas of your life where you're particularly vulnerable to foolish decision making? Wherever they are, whatever it is, bring them to God. Bring them to God. Ask for his cleansing power to come into your life and to help you remove that behavior. And then you have to decide, what am I going to do differently? What am I going to do differently? If we can just cut down our own foolish behavior, it will make a huge difference in foolproofing our lives and keeping us from experiencing the consequences of foolishness. So the first one is we have to recognize and remove our own foolish behavior. The second, recognize and avoid foolish people. This is that rinse stage. We're going to rinse away the rest of the remaining foolishness out of our lives. Now, a tech company recently did a fascinating survey. They wanted to measure the impact of high and low performers on the rest of their coworkers. And what they found was really, really quite stunning, actually. If you sat within 25 feet of a high-performing individual, your personal work productivity increased 15%. They call it positive spillover. On the negative end, if you sat within 25 feet of a negative performer, your work productivity decreased by double that, 30%, as much as 30%. The negative spillover was huge from being around a negative person. So what this study kind of showed is that people around us have an impact on our outcomes. And the negative impact can often be stronger than a relatively similar positive impact. This is why Proverbs repeatedly warns us about the danger of having foolish people in our lives. Proverbs 22:24. Do not make friends with the hot-tempered person. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn their ways and get yourself ensnared. The closer you are, and the more often you are around fools, the more likely you are to get dragged down by them. But that's a lot harder than it seems, isn't it? Recovering addicts struggle with this. Pro athletes struggle with this. Anyone with any level of success sometimes struggles with this. In fact, we've all probably at one point or another had to make decisions along these lines with people in our lives. Maybe it was a friend you've had since you were a kid. You have memories, you have history, you have loyalty with this person. But along the way, they've made different decisions. And your lives have ended up on different paths. And when they come to you and struggling, it can be so tempting to want to help and want to engage. But it's so easy to get dragged into their world and get dragged into that drama. And it's another problem altogether when the person involved is family. Maybe you have a family member who doesn't ever take responsibility, but they're very good at emotional manipulation. They will guilt trip you about your success. They will prey on your sense of duty. They will abuse your loving instincts. But you think to yourself, hey, they're family. Now, there are some people in life that we just can't avoid, or even sometimes that we shouldn't avoid. So what do we do in those circumstances? What do we do with that? People we can't remove or avoid. In those instances, we need to have clearly defined boundaries, relational boundaries, emotional boundaries, sometimes even physical boundaries that we decide on in advance to keep ourselves from getting dragged down by their foolish behavior. Removing people or setting boundaries with foolish people is a necessary part of maturing spiritually and emotionally, even if it's not that easy. Are there people in your life that you need to be avoiding or setting boundaries with? And our third step in foolproofing our life, recognize and hang around wise people. Having wise people in your life can provide a check from our worst tendencies towards foolishness. I'll give you an example of this. A number of years ago, when I was in a different church, something happened to me in that ministry that I just was treated absolutely horribly. I was treated absolutely horribly, and I was angry about it. I called up one of my mentors, who is much more seasoned in ministry with him, and I told him the whole story. I laid it out. I went full vent on this guy. Not at him, but like the whole situation. I was so angry, I wanted to turn in my resignation at that moment. Because he's a wise individual, he managed to talk me down. He managed to talk me through the negative consequences of those sort of decisions and provide me with a much clearer, much wiser path forward. And I'm glad I listened to him in those moments. But had he not been in my life, I might not have. In fact, I probably wouldn't have listened. Do you have people in your life who play a similar role for you? You need people in your life. You need wise people in your life. And whereas before we've been training ourselves to recognize fools, we also need to learn how to recognize the wise. And it shouldn't be a surprise to us that the wise people exhibit the exact opposite traits that people who are foolish are. Do you know how to recognize wise people? And if you do, are you willing to do what it takes to initiate bringing relationships into them? Find someone who you think is wise. Ask them out for coffee. Have them in your life. Say, I'd love to pick your brain about marriage or about parenthood or about jobs or whatever it happens to be. Get those people in your life. You will probably have to initiate in order to do this. But I can promise you, if you have wise people in your life, it will prevent you from doing foolish things. And we all need that level of prevention. So today, if you want to respond, which of these areas do you need to work on in foolproofing your life? Is it recognizing and removing foolish behavior? Is it foolish people? Or is it getting those wise people in your life? If there's one specific one that you need to work on, or maybe there's multiple ones, put that on the back of your connection card. We'd love to be praying for you today. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you this morning. And God, Proverbs provides such a depth of wisdom for us. But it also shines a spotlight on our foolishness. The many, many times and circumstances where we make poor decisions. We act like fools. We let ourselves be influenced by foolish people. And God, probably each one of us have had and felt those circumstances and felt the effects of that. But God, this morning we have the opportunity to recognize foolish behavior that exists within us. God, use your Holy Spirit. Send us information. God, tell us where in our lives we have foolish tendencies, where we're tempted to engage in foolish behavior. And God, help us to bring those to you. And God, I know some people really struggle with trying to remove or set boundaries with the foolish people in their lives. God, it can never be easy. God, give us the strength and courage to do what we need to do to keep from being dragged down by others. And God, send us wise people. God, help us not to try to go through this alone. Give us wise people in our lives to help us avoid our foolishness. If we do, we will be amazed at the amount of consequences that we can avoid and how much better our decision making is, how much sounder our life is. Help us to do that this morning. In your name, amen.
Thanks again for listening. Any step you take towards Jesus is a step in the right direction. You can find out more about us at crbic.org. That's crbic.org.